Launch time for the original Nintendo Wii was a wild time. December 2006, I believe I was in my second year of high school, and Wiis were all the rage, being sold out absolutely everywhere.
It wasn't until about February of 2007 until I finally got one, and that was still pretty early since the Wii's availability wasn't the best back then. You could say I got lucky. Nevertheless, with the launch of the Wii came its interesting lineup of launch titles.
Yeah, they weren't anything spectacular.
Some examples of Wii launch titles include Rayman Raving Rabbids,
Don't get me started.
Wii Sports, Wii Play, Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess, and Red Steel.
God, not Red Steel again.
That was a close call, but we made it. Thanks to you, Scott.
That's it. I'm getting rid of this shit once and for all. Somebody else's problem now.
You look good. Yeah, you do. Who's a pretty boy? Who's a pretty boy? Who's a... What's this shit? Potato sucking mother.
There was also WarioWare Smooth Moves, that was a good one, and Excite Truck.
Big surprise, right? I mean, that is why you clicked the video.
Nintendo has always handled console launch windows in a strange but logical way. Back when the Wii first launched, and the same goes for the original Nintendo DS and I guess the Wii U as well, Nintendo wanted game developers to use the motion controls fucking everywhere, even in places they didn't belong, simply to show off the capabilities of the Wii and its revolutionary new controller. Enter Excite Truck, a fascinating little game that is what ukulele is to Banjo-Kazooie, a spiritual successor. In this case, a spiritual successor to the NES title Excite Bike. You all know the one. Da 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 da.
Yeah, that one.
Excite Truck is one of those games, the kind that takes buttons and tells them to hit the showers. Well, kind of. I am of course speaking of the game's controls. This game is basically all motion controlled. Thankfully, they were sensible and did use some buttons just for good measure. When playing Excite Truck, you're meant to hold the Wiimote horizontally like a steering wheel. You drive with a 2 button, brake and reverse with a 1 button, and boost by pressing the D-pad. These work fine and as intended. The steering controls, however, they're motion controlled, by tilting the Wiimote left and right, and they work. Sometimes.
See, here's the problem with early Wii games. The original Wiimote, in terms of its motion controls, kinda sucked. When it came to pointing at the screen, it worked fine. When it came to shaking vigorously, it worked okay. But when it came to smooth movement, it really struggled.
This was the case with a lot of early Wii games. Maybe it's because the technology was still new, but something always felt off. They worked to a degree where it was usable, but never quite felt perfect. Excite Truck is no exception. Motion controls in Excite Truck are used for your steering as well as some movement while airborne, and it can be very slippery. It's almost as if there's a delay from you turning the Wiimote and the game reacting, and because of this the game can feel like a struggle. The way the game works is that you face off against other trucks, not necessarily racing however. The actual goal is to gain stars. Stars are your rewards for pulling off certain actions while racing, and each level has a goal amount of stars to try and gain in order to get a good rank. There are a few methods to try and gain stars. You can do stunts such as air spins, tree runs, turbo jumps, or by passing through rings in the air, knock other trucks hard enough to get what's called a truck smash, or simply finish in a high place. Coming in first at the end, for instance, gains you a 50-star bonus. Gaining stars can be quite tough and sometimes just feels like a bit of luck, partly due to the wobbly motion controls. The game tries its best to teach you the game's mechanics, but does so in the worst possible way. Mandatory, unskippable tutorials. So the first time you start this game up with a fresh save, you can't just dive into the game. Instead, you're forced to play through a bunch of tutorials. There are 2 basic tutorial sets, each containing 5 tutorials. That makes 10 separate tutorials just covering the basics, and they are by no means fun. Essentially, they just equate to drive for 10 seconds to the finish line and do the thing. Then you get the stunts tutorials. Again, there are 2 of these segments, this time containing 4 tutorials each. In these, you need to wrestle with the controls to pull off stunts, which, speaking of, are a waste. The only real stunt you have proper agency over is the air spin, and seriously, there is just no point. You only get 1 star per spin, and 9 times out of 10, it'll just cause you to land poorly or even facing the wrong direction. Now I do understand the importance of these tutorials. Without them, certain game features may have gone entirely unnoticed in my eyes. such as the stunts, but the game, while having a convoluted control scheme, is pretty easy to wrap your head around. You don't need 18 tutorial levels to understand how to play. If you've ever watched Main Quest, my Let's Play channel I run with my good friend Brian, you'll know that he's just as opinionated on games as I am.
Look how quick you got that.
Yeah.
Like, how many minutes was that? 5 minutes. 5 minutes, if that, and you've already got the tunic. Twilight Princess, we're walking about a fucking boring-ass village, looking at fucking idiots, staring at a wall and a beehive.
Funny thing is, Twilight Princess came out after this.
So, I thought I'd sit him down and give him a proper go in Excite Truck just to gauge his reaction. And within minutes of starting the game up, in typical Brian fashion, he told me to go fuck myself and stormed out of the room. I think he likes it. This isn't a case of confusing controls like Star Fox Zero. This is a case of controls being in that awkward space of they kind of work. Turning left and right simply feels off, and because of what I mentioned earlier, trying to make small turns to adjust your vehicle for more precision barely works due to the Wiimote just not picking up those subtle movements well enough. And even then, sometimes you can try really hard to pull off a left turn and maybe twist your Wiimote a bit too far, and the Wiimote interprets that as you wanting to take a hard right and flying off into the middle of nowhere. Or no doubt into a big lake. And it's little frustrations like this that ruin the experience for me. You can struggle to actually enjoy the game because you're too busy fighting with the controls. It tries some neat things with the motion controls. Excite Truck has a large emphasis on jumping over hills and ramps, much like its predecessor, Excite Bike. That game was all about racing on dirt bikes over big ramps. This is much the same, except it being trucks this time and each jump being more worthwhile. You can do what's called a turbo jump by hitting the turbo button just as you go off a ramp, and it rewards you with extra distance and a pretty spectacular flame trail behind your wheels. This is especially useful for getting that extra distance and speed to help with acquiring stars. As you play through the game's main mode, which consists of loosely put together cups, you'll unlock more vehicles, each with their own stats. These stats being speed, turbo, air grip and handling. I don't think I really need to explain what these are, but here we go. Speed is how fast your truck's max speed is, turbo is how strong your truck gets boosted when turbo is used, and I believe the better the turbo, the longer you can use it without your temperature overheating. Air is how well your vehicle moves when airborne, how quickly you can adjust your orientation and turn to try and land those nice landings. Grip is how tight your truck turns, and handling is either slow, medium or fast, which is how responsive your truck is when it comes to turning. These stats in my experience do tend to make quite a difference, if only just for the handling, since that's what I tend to be worrying about the most. My deciding factor for picking a truck was literally just, which one do I think looks cool, make it red, start the game, easy peasy. During races, your truck can use turbo at any time, but there's a limiting factor, and that is your truck's temperature gauge, which typically fills up really fast. Your truck's temperature, when not used, is always cooling down, so no power-ups or anything are really required to get more boost. There are ways to aid your engine in cooling down though. Whenever your truck is airborne, the engine cools down doubly as fast, and when you are in shallow water, your engine is permanent cool, until you leave the water, meaning that when you're in water you can boost as much as you want. Turbo is how you perform a turbo jump, just by hitting the turbo button as you go off a ramp or hit a small bump. And honestly, turbo jumping is one of the game's best mechanics. It's not restricted by particular sections of the map, you can literally turbo jump off the smallest bump if you hit it correctly. There are of course other ways to boost. If you get enough air and you manage to land flat without your truck's front or back being askew, you'll get what's called a nice landing, and get a free boost that doesn't affect your temperature gauge. It's short-lived but definitely strong. The same can be said for picking up the POW power-up. You'll find these dotted around tracks in particular locations, and when you grab one, you get instantly boosted and are able to mow your way through trees without fear of crashing, all while accompanied by an alarm sound. Strange choice of sound, but a great power-up nonetheless, providing you can get close enough to pick it up. Visually, the game is nothing spectacular. It's about what you'd expect from a Wii launch title, because keep in mind, the Wii was just hot off the heels of the GameCube and PS2 era, and Nintendo opted for standard definition and pretty minimal power. It meant that earlier games, especially, were very basic in their look, but that's not to say this game looks bad. Vehicles have some nice reflections, and the environments are all fairly well populated with trees, as well as some nice effects, such as glare from the sun, and to be honest, Excite Truck is just fun to look at. Sometimes crazy things can happen. Your truck will get lots of air, partner that with all the crazy terramorphing chaos going on and other trucks crashing and zooming around you. It can lead to some amazing spectacles. I once landed on another truck, then turbo jumped off the truck I landed on, while it was still in the air itself. Just awesome. This, with all the crazy flame effects and speed blur all over the place, can give the game a very exhilarating look, and makes it a very visually appealing game when played properly. The tracks in this game are all based on countries with vague locations, so you get tracks with names like Canada, Fiji, China, and... Scotland?
Oh my god. Such realistic graphics. Oh.
Each track has a couple variants, an example being in Scotland. They are both set in Scotland, but there are a couple different tracks, one called Baron's Run and the other called Highland Moors. And while they look similar, they're very different in terms of the terrain and obstacles that you have to tackle. The game's locations and subsequent levels are all fairly different, not just in terms of their appearance but also their layout. Some levels having lots of verticality to them while others can have small but frequent ramps. Since this game relies so heavily on air tricks and turbo jumps for gaining both stars and speed, all levels have their fair share of ramps and jumps, but some are more intense than others. A favourite level of mine being the Mexico stage, Devil's Ladder. This stage is just insane. A massive vertical drop where you and other trucks are compacted between a big ravine. You can land and jump off certain bits of rock hanging in between the walls. You can tear through trees and go jumping all over the place, and this level legitimately made me have a ton of fun. I thoroughly enjoyed myself here. Music in Excite Truck is certainly there. Some tracks stick out more than others, and I would say for the most part the music is fairly good, consisting mostly of hard rock electric guitar sounds with a bit of synth thrown into the mix. I don't claim to know much when it comes to music, so I could be talking out my ass when it comes to these details. I will say, however, this one track from China sounds awfully familiar, or is it just me? Finally, let's take a look at Excite Truck's other game modes. First off is Challenge Mode. There are three kinds of challenge modes: Gate, Ring and Crush. Gate is exactly what it sounds like. You drive through a track laid out in front of you and stick to the beaten trail and pass through lit up gates which get increasingly narrow all the while on a very small time limit, as you gain more time by hitting the gates successfully. Next we have Ring, which is similar to Gate but probably doubly as difficult. Instead of passing through gates, you need to jump through rings of varying size to gain stars. Again, while on a time limit, although this mode's time limit is much more forgiving. These two in particular are horrible. They are simply not fun to play because these modes just emphasize this game's biggest problem: its control. Hitting gates and rings feels more like luck than skill, and that's not how it should feel. You need to try desperately to wrestle with the steering, and with the ring challenge, just fuck it. It's so damn hard, not just to line up your jump, but to make sure you get enough height and distance. It just feels like it requires far too much precision and luck, something this game does not make easy. The last challenge, called Crush, is by far the best out of these modes. You get thrown onto a map and just get to beat the shit out of other trucks. My only gripe with this mode is that it feels like victory is just kinda handed to you. At no point did I ever feel like the other trucks were actively trying to take me out, but at least it didn't require a ton of precision and a strict time limit. There's also a versus mode, but fuck it. In conclusion, Excite Truck is an interesting look into what the Wii can do with its motion controls, but for all it tries to do, it usually just falls short of the mark. Tracks are decent, and while some are better than others, they still serve their purpose well, letting you get lots of air and gain stars and landing boosts. Mechanics such as the turbo, truck smashing, power-ups and terramorphing are all fun, and the focus on gaining stars rather than coming first was definitely a good choice, as it means you can focus more on having a fun time performing stunts and clashing with other trucks than stressing over your placement in races. While the game can be enjoyable, and I do still have a lot of fun playing it, it can feel held back due to these mandatory motion controls. I honestly believe that had it not been for these motion controls, Excite Truck could be a fantastic and exhilarating game. Thank you for clicking on this video and giving it a chance. I'm a bit sick this week, but hopefully it didn't impact the video too much. But seriously, you watching these videos means a lot to me. As I mentioned in the video, I run a Let's Play channel called Main Quest with a good friend of mine named Brian. He's an asshole, but he's goddamn hilarious, and I think you'll really like what we get up to over there. I'd also like to give a big thanks to Freezax for joining me in this one once again. Always a pleasure working with you, man. Also, big thanks to Verabel for filling the role of cameraman, or in this case, camera lady. You might notice I'm actually in focus this episode. Exciting stuff. If you like my work and you want to consider supporting the show, I have a Patreon for those of you who want to have influence over the show. For instance, one of the bead arts found in the wall of this episode was requested by Pars, one of my Patreon supporters, as a reward for being generous and supporting the show. So if that sounds right up your alley, then consider helping out. Now, I believe that's all for now, so see you next time.